The invasion begins. The stars in the night sky shimmered as the massive alien fleet cruised towards Earth. The ships, unlike anything humans had ever seen, moved with deadly precision, cutting through the atmosphere like a blade through soft flesh. The leader of this terrifying force, General Xyler, stood at the bridge of the largest ship, his dark eyes focused on the planet below. "This is it," he muttered to himself. "The humans won't stand a chance." Xyler had seen many worlds fall to his might. The alien empire he served was one of the most powerful in the galaxy. No species had ever dared to challenge their technology, their weapons, their armies. The humans were no different. They had been observed for years, and their primitive ways of life had been deemed unworthy of attention. Xyler had been instructed to destroy them. The general looked out the massive windows of his ship, observing the blue planet in front of him, Earth, a planet full of weak, soft creatures who had barely discovered fire, let alone mastered space travel. His mission was clear: wipe out the human resistance and take control of this pathetic world around him. The bridge crew worked with cold efficiency. The hum of machinery and the soft tapping of alien fingers on consoles filled the air. Xyler turned to his second-in-command, an alien named Zarek, and ordered, "Deploy the first wave. Let's see if these humans are truly as weak as they appear." Zarek gave a sharp nod. The first wave of alien soldiers, elite troops with advanced armor and weapons, were ready to land on Earth. They would crush any resistance with ease. The general's thoughts were calm, almost indifferent. He had seen the fear in the eyes of countless species as his forces tore through their defenses. He expected the same from the humans, but as the alien soldiers prepared to descend, a flicker of doubt crossed Xyler's mind. His fleet had entered Earth's orbit without encountering any resistance. No fighters had been launched. No planetary defense systems had activated. It almost felt too easy. Is something wrong? Xyler questioned, looking at the screens that monitored the planet below. "Everything is in order, General," Zarek replied, his voice steady. "The humans are unaware. They are unprepared for this level of attack." Xyler hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Proceed." The massive drop pods containing the alien soldiers shot down towards Earth, cutting through the clouds and leaving streaks of fire behind them. The first wave had begun. Xyler watched with a sense of superiority as his soldiers made their descent. There was no turning back now. On the ground below, a small human military unit stationed in a remote area of the planet's northern continent prepared for an attack. They had no idea was coming. Captain James Blaze Hunter was in charge of the squad, a seasoned leader with years of combat experience. The squad, made up of soldiers who had fought in previous skirmishes around the world, was ready for whatever the aliens might throw at them. "We've got incoming," Blaze said, scanning the sky through the binoculars. "Stay sharp, everyone." His squad, mostly composed of elite soldiers and a few engineers, had been stationed here for months, working on repairs to an old military base. The base wasn't much, but it had everything they needed: guns, ammo, and a handful of old defense systems. They weren't expecting to fight anything, let alone an alien invasion. But as the alien ships began to land, the humans quickly realized they had underestimated the situation. The drop pods crashed into the Earth, sending shockwaves through the ground. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the sky filled with the sound of alien technology buzzing through the air. Blaze's squad was now on high alert, preparing for a fight that none of them had imagined. Despite their shock, they moved quickly into action. They gathered their weapons, checked their equipment, and set up defensive positions. There was no time to waste. "The aliens were coming. What do we know about these guys?" asked Lieutenant Sarah Reyes, one of Blaze's most trusted officers. "Nothing," Blaze replied. "We've never seen anything like this. But I'm guessing they're here to kill us all. Let's make sure they don't get the chance." The alien soldiers, clad in dark, sleek armor, began to deploy from their pods. They had advanced weapons, energy rifles that hummed with power and deadly precision. Their helmets obscured their faces, and their movements were swift, coordinated. These were not the clumsy invaders that had been seen in the old stories. These were soldiers who had been bred for war. Blaze and his squad took cover behind the concrete structures of the base. They knew they were outgunned. The alien forces had technology far beyond anything humanity possessed. But they also knew something else. Humans had something that the aliens could never predict. Courage. As the first wave of aliens advanced, Blaze turned to his squad and gave them a determined look. "We fight like hell, and we make sure they regret ever coming." Here, the battle began. The aliens moved with precision, their weapons firing with deadly force. The human soldiers fired back with everything they had, though their weapons were nowhere near as advanced. The aliens cut through their defenses like a knife through butter. But Blaze's team wasn't giving up. They set traps, used their environment to their advantage, and fought with everything they had. The humans were outgunned, outmatched, and outnumbered. Yet, they fought with a fierce, unrelenting spirit. Each shot fired was a defiance of their fate. The alien soldiers were strong, but the humans were determined. Blaze could feel it in his bones. The aliens had underestimated humanity. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. As the battle raged on, General Zyler watched from his ship, unable to comprehend what was happening. His soldiers were supposed to be unbeatable, yet these humans, these primitive creatures, were fighting back with a fire that Zyler hadn't expected. He was stunned. This was not what he had planned for. Something was wrong. These humans, they are unbelievable, Zyler muttered, his mind racing. This will not be as easy as we thought. The first wave of the invasion had begun, but it was far from over. The human response as the first wave of alien soldiers advanced on the human base. Captain Blaze Hunter stood firm, his heart pounding but his mind calm. The chaos of battle surrounded him, but he was focused. He had seen war before, but nothing like this. These aliens were unlike any enemy he had ever faced, and yet, as the first shots rang out and the ground shook under the force of explosions, Blaze knew they weren't going to back down. The humans weren't going to simply surrender to these invaders. "Stay sharp, everyone," Blaze shouted as he watched his soldiers move swiftly into position. His voice cut through the noise like a beacon, steadying his squad. The base had been built with old, reliable technology, nothing fancy, but it was sturdy. The concrete walls provided some cover, but Blaze knew that wouldn't be enough. The aliens were heavily armed, and they had numbers on their side. "Lieutenant Reyes, take your team and cover the south side," Blaze barked. "Sergeant Calloway, you're with me. We're hitting their left flank. Everyone else, fall back to the secondary defense line once the first wave hits. We can't let them breach." Reyes gave a quick salute, her face grim as she nodded. "Understood, sir." The humans were outmatched in terms of technology and firepower, but they had something the aliens didn't experience in real combat. They had been trained to fight against overwhelming odds, to improvise when things went wrong, and to never, ever give up. It was a philosophy that had kept them alive through countless battles, and Blaze was counting on it now. The alien soldiers approached with chilling precision. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons glowing with a deadly light. Blaze's men didn't flinch. Instead, they waited, holding their fire until the last possible second. Then, all hell broke loose. The first blast of gunfire erupted from the human positions, striking down the first few alien soldiers. But the aliens were quick, their armor nearly impervious to standard ammunition. They returned fire, the air crackling with energy weapons. As their beams sliced through the air, Blaze dove behind a stack of crates, pulling his weapon into place. He knew they couldn't rely on their weapons alone. They had to outsmart the aliens. As the first wave of attackers approached, Blaze's team set their traps. Explosives were rigged in key spots, mines planted in the ground where they were least expected. The aliens were too focused on brute force to notice. They were used to overpowering their enemies, not dealing with the unpredictable tactics of humans. Blaze could hear the alien voices through the crackling cums. They were speaking in their alien tongue, but the tone was unmistakable anger, confusion, and disbelief. They hadn't expected resistance like this. These humans, with their old-fashioned guns and bombs, were proving to be far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. "Now!" Blaze shouted. At his command, several mines detonated, sending a series of explosions rippling through the alien ranks. The shockwave knocked back the first wave of attackers, sending them scrambling for cover. But Blaze wasn't done yet. He grabbed his rifle and moved swiftly through the base, firing at any alien soldier who dared to show themselves. The humans weren't retreating, they were fighting back with everything they had. The alien general, Xyler, watched from his command ship, his eyes narrowing as he observed the human resistance. He had expected this invasion to be quick, to be easy. But what he saw unfolding below him didn't match his expectations. The humans were relentless. They fought like animals cornered, and in some ways, that made them even more dangerous than the most advanced alien soldiers. Xyler's mind raced as he tried to understand what he was witnessing. These humans weren't acting out of fear, they were fighting out of a deep, unwavering determination to survive. "They must be desperate," Xyler muttered under his breath. "No species should fight this fiercely over something as insignificant as survival." Yet, as the hours passed and the human soldiers continued to hold their ground, Xyler began to realize something far more troubling. The humans weren't just desperate, they were resourceful. They weren't afraid to take risks, to make sacrifices for the greater good, and they were united. They had something Xyler's forces lacked: a deep bond with one another that made them stronger than their individual weapons. As the battle raged on, the aliens' initial confidence began to waver. For the first time, Xyler started to question his previous assumptions. This wasn't a war they could win with brute force alone. The humans were too unpredictable, too clever. And they were fighting for their home, a cause that Xyler knew all too well could drive a species to do anything on the ground. Blaze's squad pushed back the first wave of invaders, but they knew it was only the beginning. The aliens would send more troops. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. And they would have to fight every step of the way if they were going to win. Blaze wiped the sweat from his brow, his face a mask of determination. His team had proven one thing today: the human spirit was a force to be reckoned with. As long as they had breath in their bodies, they would continue to fight. And as he stood there, watching his soldiers prepare for the next wave, Blaze couldn't help but smile. The aliens had no idea what they were up against. They had underestimated the power of humanity. And that mistake would be their downfall. Shock and awe. General Xyler's grip tightened around the armrest of his command chair as he watched the chaos unfold below. His fleet had never encountered resistance like this. The humans, though armed with primitive tools, compared to his technologically superior soldiers, fought with a cunning and ferocity that he hadn't anticipated. What should have been a simple mission was turning into a nightmare. He had underestimated them, and that mistake was costing him dearly. The first wave of alien soldiers had been repelled, but that was only the beginning. Xyler knew the human forces would regroup and strike back with everything they had. He wasn't wrong. Within hours, human forces had begun to pick apart the edges of his attack lines, using guerrilla tactics that threw off his well-coordinated military strategies. They used the environment to their advantage, disappearing into the dense forests and urban landscapes before launching surprise counterattacks. It was as if the humans had become part of the land itself. Xyler stood up, his eyes burning with frustration. He had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest. Instead, he was faced with an enemy that refused to give up. "Send the second wave," he ordered coldly, his voice cutting through the silence of the command bridge. "Bring in reinforcements. We need to crush them." As the alien forces prepared for the second wave, Blaze Hunter and his team were already anticipating the next attack. They knew the aliens wouldn't stop after one defeat. The first wave had been a taste of the destruction to come. The human soldiers had fought with everything they had, but they were few in number and vastly outmatched. They couldn't afford to stand still. They needed to keep moving, to keep pushing back. Blaze stood at the front of the small command center, set up in a nearby abandoned building, his eyes scanning the battlefield through a set of binoculars. His squad was exhausted, their uniforms torn and stained with the debris of the previous battle. But their resolve was unwavering. The first wave had shown them that they could hold their own, and that knowledge fueled their determination. "Aliens are coming back for round 2, Blaze said, turning to his team. "We don't stop, we hit them harder this time. We've learned their moves, now we outsmart them." Sergeant Calloway, one of the toughest soldiers Blaze had ever known, nodded. "We're ready, sir. Whatever they throw at us will be ready," Blaze smiled. "That's the spirit. We won't let them take our planet, not without a fight." As the humans readied themselves, the alien fleet above Earth prepared for a full-scale assault. Xyler's forces deployed wave after wave of soldiers, dropping them into key areas across the planet. But what Xyler didn't anticipate was the human counterattack. The humans had set a trap, and they were waiting for the aliens to take the bait. As the aliens stormed across the landscape, expecting little resistance, they were met with an explosive shockwave. Human-made bombs went off all around them, detonating at precise locations. The aliens' advanced technology, designed to withstand most conventional attacks, was thrown into chaos. The soldiers, disoriented by the explosions, were thrown off balance. The humans, though outnumbered, now had the upper hand. The traps were set. The first batch of aliens was decimated before they even knew what hit them. But Blaze knew this wasn't enough. The aliens would adapt quickly. They always did. "Fall back to the secondary position," Blaze ordered. "We'll lure them deeper into the trap." His squad moved with purpose, ducking into cover and moving from building to building, setting up defensive positions along their retreat route. They were fighting a war of attrition, hoping to wear down the alien forces piece by piece. Each step was calculated, each action designed to further destabilize their enemies. The next wave of alien soldiers came charging in, their weapons glowing brightly, their armor gleaming under the sunlight. They were relentless, their movements swift and synchronized. They were, after all, some of the most highly trained soldiers in the galaxy. They knew how to fight, but the humans knew how to survive. Blaze's squad moved swiftly, using their surroundings to hide their movements. They struck from the shadows, picking off aliens one by one. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. Every alien soldier they took down was another blow to Xyler's confidence, another step toward proving that humanity was far stronger than the aliens had ever imagined. Xyler watched in stunned silence as his troops fell back. The human tactics were unlike anything he had ever encountered. They were unpredictable. They didn't follow any military doctrine Xyler knew. And that was what made them dangerous. "I want all units to adapt," Xyler barked into his communicator, his voice filled with frustration. "Take the humans seriously. Do not underestimate them again." But as he spoke, another explosion shook the ground. This one was bigger, more powerful, and it sent a shockwave that rattled the alien ships in orbit. Xyler's face twisted in disbelief. It was clear that the humans were not only surviving, they were fighting with a strength that matched their will to protect their home. Blaze, standing at the heart of the battle, felt a rush of adrenaline. He could see the aliens begin to lose their composure. They were starting to falter. They didn't know it yet, but they had already lost the psychological battle. The humans had turned the tide, and now it was only a matter of time before the aliens were driven from their world. "Keep pushing," Blaze shouted, his voice full of fire. "We're not letting them win, not today." The alien general clenched his fists, his jaw set tight. He had underestimated the humans, and it was proving to be a fatal mistake. The war had only just begun, but for the first time Zayler wasn't. Sure, they were going to win. The unthinkable happened. The battle raged on, with every moment feeling like an eternity. General Zayler had never been more frustrated in his life. The human soldiers were relentless, and their tactics were unlike anything his empire had faced before. His forces, once so confident in their superiority, were now being pushed back, one ambush at a time. Each time his soldiers made a move, the humans had already anticipated it, outwitting them at every turn. Zayler's mind raced as he watched his troops struggle to maintain control. He knew that if he didn't change his strategy, soon this war could slip out of his grasp. There was no time for hesitation, no time for second-guessing. The alien general's thoughts were interrupted by the sharp voice of his advisor. "Zarek, General, the humans are advancing again. We need to reinforce the outer perimeter," Zarek urged, his voice tense with urgency. Zayler stared out the viewports of his command ship, watching as his troops began to retreat from the latest human counterattack. He could feel the heat of frustration boiling inside him. He had always been in control, always able to crush his enemies effortlessly. But the humans had shattered that illusion. He had underestimated them, and now, the cost was mounting with every passing minute. "We can't keep throwing soldiers at them," Zayler muttered, more to himself than to Zarek. "They're adapting too quickly." Zarek hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Then perhaps it is time we consider a more direct approach." Zayler looked at his advisor, his expression darkening. "You mean send me down there?" Zarek nodded slowly. "Yes, General. If you lead the assault in person, the human forces will see that you are not just another alien commander. You will become the face of the invasion. It could demoralize them." Zayler considered this for a moment. His pride, his experience, told him that leading the ground assault was beneath him. He was a strategist, a master of war. But his pride was no longer the issue. The humans had shown a resilience that no one had expected. They had turned their backs on defeat and fought back with everything they had. And now, Zayler had to consider the unthinkable. Perhaps a more personal approach was the only way to break their spirit. "Very well," he said, his voice cold. "Prepare the landing craft. I will lead the next assault myself." As Zayler prepared for his descent to Earth, Captain Blaze Hunter and his team were already anticipating the next wave of alien attacks. The battle had taken its toll on them, but they weren't about to give up. The humans had already proven they could stand against overwhelming odds. And now, with every wave that came, they grew stronger, more confident. The aliens hadn't yet realized what they were up against. And Blaze intended to keep it that way. Blaze paced back and forth in the makeshift command center. His soldiers gathered around him, their faces a mix of exhaustion and determination. The scent of smoke and sweat hung heavy in the air as they prepared for the next wave. "We've held them off so far," Blaze said, his voice steady. "But we need to be ready for this next attack. The aliens won't keep coming forever, not if we can break them." "We can't stop now," Lieutenant Riaz added, her voice sharp with resolve. "We've been through worse. These aliens are nothing we can't handle." Blaze nodded in agreement. He knew they were right. The aliens had underestimated humanity at every turn, but they hadn't learned yet. They still thought of Earth as just another conquest, another planet to be dominated. What they didn't realize was that the humans weren't just defending their homes. They were fighting for their very survival. The air grew tense as they heard the sound of engines in the distance. Blaze's heart began to race. He knew what was coming, The aliens were preparing for their next assault. But this time, it wasn't just another wave of soldiers. This time, General Zeiler himself was coming. Blaze didn't need to be told. He knew that if Zeiler led the attack personally, it meant the alien general was finally taking them seriously. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about breaking the human spirit, crushing the last vestiges of hope. Blaze's squad quickly got into position, their eyes scanning the horizon as they braced for what was to come. When the first dropship descended from the sky, Blaze felt a chill run down his spine. It was larger than the others, and it moved with purpose. The ground shook as it landed, and the soldiers disembarked. At the front of the group, wearing dark armor and exuding an aura of terrifying authority, was General Zeiler himself. Blaze's jaw tightened as he observed the alien general. Zeiler wasn't like the other soldiers. He radiated confidence, and his eyes burned with an intensity that made even the most hardened soldiers uneasy. But Blaze knew this was their moment. If they could defeat Zeiler, they could break the alien. Morale, it wouldn't end the war, but it would give them the edge they needed. Steady, Blaze muttered to his team. This is the fight we've been waiting for. Zeiler surveyed the human soldiers as he approached, his face a mask of disdain. You really thought you could stop us? He asked, his voice booming through the alien comm system. Blaze stepped forward, his hand resting on the grip of his rifle. We're still standing, aren't we? He replied, his voice steady and full of defiance. Zeiler's eyes narrowed. You'll fall, just like the rest. With that, the battle erupted. The human soldiers opened fire, their weapons flashing as they engaged the alien forces. Zeiler moved with precision, his own weapon firing with deadly accuracy. But what Zeiler didn't expect was the relentless determination of Blaze's team. They didn't just fight back, they adapted. They moved as one, working together to outmaneuver and outsmart the aliens at every turn. As the battle continued, Blaze couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The aliens had underestimated them from the start, and now they were going to pay the price. The fight wasn't over, but with every move, Blaze could see Zeiler's confidence begin to falter. The human soldiers weren't backing down, and they weren't going to lose. The aliens were learning the hard way that humans were not so easily defeated. Unexpected alliances. The ground trembled as the battle continued to rage, but there was something different in the air now. The humans were no longer just defending. They were pushing back, showing the aliens that they weren't a species to be crushed so easily. General Zeiler, who had once been confident in his fleet's superiority, could now feel the shift in the tide. His forces, despite their advanced technology, were beginning to struggle. And worse yet, there were whispers among his ranks, rumors of human soldiers using tactics no one could predict, outwitting them at every turn. In a quiet corner of his command ship, Zeiler stood, his fingers tapping against the metal surface of a nearby console. He was no longer just a general. He was a man facing the impossible. The reports coming in were bleak. His forces had suffered losses. Human resistance was growing stronger, and morale was plummeting. He had to do something. He couldn't afford to lose. But what options did he have left? General Zarek's voice interrupted his thoughts, low and cautious. There's something you need to see. Zeiler turned to face his advisor. Zarek's expression was unreadable, but Zeiler knew better than to ignore his instincts. Zarek wasn't one to show concern without good reason. The alien advisor moved aside, revealing a holographic display showing the situation on the ground. Zeiler's eyes narrowed as he watched the feed. It wasn't what he expected to see. Several human commanders who had been engaged in the frontline battles had gone silent, only to reappear hours later in an unexpected location. They were meeting with a small group of alien defectors, those who had abandoned Zeiler's forces after seeing the cruelty of the invasion. Zeiler's jaw clenched. This wasn't just a small group of soldiers, it was an organized Resistance forming within his own ranks. The humans are making alliances, Zarek explained, his voice filled with unease. Some of our own soldiers, tired of the invasion, are defecting to their side. Xyler turned sharply to face him. Traitors, he growled. What are they thinking? They're throwing their futures away. Not just that, Zarek said quietly. These defectors are teaching the humans advanced alien technology. They're helping them understand our tactics, our weapon systems. The realization hit Xyler like a blow to the chest. His own soldiers were giving the humans the very tools they needed to fight back, and with the knowledge of how his forces operated, they could turn the tide. It was a deadly mistake, one that would haunt him. If the humans ever discovered the full extent of his empire's secrets, Xyler's mind raced. He had no choice but to deal with this new threat head-on. But there was a part of him that couldn't quite shake the realization that these humans weren't just a threat, they were proving something else entirely. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their freedom. And that made them dangerous in ways Xyler hadn't fully understood. Meanwhile, on Earth, Blaze Hunter was dealing with a problem of his own. The human resistance was no longer just a ragtag group of survivors. It was an organized force. They had come together not just to defend their home, but to push the aliens off their planet completely. And now, Blaze was faced with a difficult decision. The alien general Xyler was growing more desperate, and the humans were running out of time. We need to make contact with the defectors, Blaze said, his voice grim. They're giving us a chance to win, but we need to move fast before Xyler figures out what's happening. Lieutenant Reyes nodded, her eyes sharp with determination. We can't trust them completely, sir. Some of them were once our enemies. I know, Blaze replied, his voice steady. But right now, we don't have the luxury of playing it safe. We need every advantage we can get. The decision was made. Blaze and a small team of soldiers, along with a few defectors who had chosen to fight for humanity, set out on a mission to secure a more permanent alliance. They had to find a way to get the alien technology and use it to their advantage before Xyler could stop them. As they moved through the war-torn landscape, Blaze couldn't help but think of how far humanity had come. When the aliens first arrived, it seemed like the end was inevitable. They were too strong, too advanced. But the humans had surprised everyone, including themselves. And now, they were on the verge of something incredible. With the help of the defectors, they might just have the firepower to push back the alien invaders once and for all. Hours later, after a tense journey through enemy territory, Blaze's team arrived at the designated location. A small outpost, hidden beneath the ruins of an old city, provided the cover they needed. The defectors were waiting for them, alien soldiers who had turned their backs on their own kind, offering the humans valuable intel in exchange for a chance at redemption. The negotiations were brief, but the message was clear. They wanted to be part of humanity's fight, and they were willing to do whatever it took to make sure the aliens lost. We can't afford to waste this opportunity, Blaze said, his voice low but filled with determination. Let's make sure they know what they're joining. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting to win. The deal was sealed. The defectors would provide the humans with alien technology, tactical insights, and a way to break Xyler's forces. In return, the humans would offer protection, a place in the new world they would rebuild after victory. Back on Xyler's command ship, the general was beginning to realize the full extent of the situation. His forces were scattered, his morale shattered, and now, with the humans receiving help from his own defectors, he was losing control of the very situation he had thought he could dominate. There was no turning back now. Prepare for the final assault, Xyler ordered, his voice cold and filled with determination. We'll crush them once and for all. But deep down, Xyler knew the truth. The humans had proven themselves worthy adversaries, and the galaxy was about to learn just how far they were willing to go to protect their home. The final stand. The air was thick with tension as the final stage of the battle unfolded across Earth. General Xyler, now fully aware of the human resistance's strength and their unexpected alliances with his own defectors, felt the weight of failure pressing down on him. His forces were spread thin, their lines cracking under the pressure of human ingenuity. The human soldiers had proved that they were not just survivors. They were fighters, willing to do anything to protect their world. Xyler's plan to crush them had turned into a nightmare. The alien general stood at the helm of his command ship, his eyes narrowing as he watched the last remnants of his fleet preparing for what would likely be their final assault. He wasn't ready to admit defeat. Not yet. Below, Blaze Hunter and his squad were preparing for the final battle, knowing that this would be their last chance to push back the alien invaders. The human resistance had grown into an unstoppable force, their tactics evolving with each passing day, but the stakes had never been higher. Xyler was pulling out all the stops, launching the final wave of his elite forces armed with the most advanced weapons and tactics his empire had ever devised. The battle that would decide Earth's fate was about to begin, and both sides knew that victory would come at a terrible cost. Blaze stood among his squad, his eyes scanning the horizon. As the first wave of alien forces approached, they had no illusions. This would be no simple skirmish. The aliens weren't just fighting to conquer. They were fighting for their survival. They had underestimated humanity for too long, and now they were paying the price. But the humans had learned and adapted. They had come together to form an alliance so powerful that even Xyler's most elite soldiers couldn't match the human spirit. "We've got one shot at this," Blaze said, his voice low but filled with certainty. "We hold this line, and we end it here. The aliens might have technology, but we've got something far stronger: our will to win." Lieutenant Reyes, who had fought beside Blaze through every step of this war, nodded, her face set in a mask of determination. "We're not backing down. Not now. Not ever." Around them, soldiers prepared their weapons, their faces a mixture of fear and fierce resolve. They knew what was coming. The aliens were coming at full force, and this would be the most difficult fight of their lives. But in the heart of every human soldier, there was a burning desire to protect what was theirs: a planet, a home, and a future. Blaze's team had positioned themselves strategically along the battlefront, using the terrain to their advantage. It wasn't just about holding their ground anymore. It was about taking the fight to the enemy. They had set up a series of traps, hidden explosives, and fortified positions, each one designed to maximize the damage they could inflict. This wasn't going to be a standstill fight. They had a plan, and they were going to make it count. As the alien forces neared, the sound of their footsteps shaking the earth, Blaze felt a surge of adrenaline. The time had come. The first shots were fired, and the ground erupted into chaos. The human soldiers fired back with everything they had, their weapons lighting up the sky as they pushed the aliens back with a force they had never expected. Xyler, watching from the comfort of his ship, was momentarily stunned by the intensity of the human resistance. They fought as if they had nothing left to lose, and in a way, they did. Their backs were against the wall, and they were fighting. For their homes, for their families, and for the very survival of their species. But Xyler wasn't about to give up just yet. He had one last weapon in his arsenal, something that would change the course of the battle. He gave the order. "Release the dreadnought," Xyler commanded, his voice cold and unyielding. "Destroy them all." The alien dreadnought, a massive warship designed for annihilation, descended from the sky. Its weapons were capable of leveling entire cities in seconds. The moment it landed, the ground trembled beneath the weight of its arrival. It was a behemoth, its guns primed and ready to wipe out everything in its path. Blaze saw the massive ship coming down and knew this was the moment they had feared. The dreadnought's weapons would destroy everything. It would end the fight in an instant if they couldn't stop it. The entire human resistance could be wiped out in a single blow. Blaze didn't hesitate. "We've got one chance," he shouted to his squad. "We take out that ship or we all die trying. This is our fight now. Let's finish it." The human soldiers quickly regrouped, and a wave of energy filled the air. They knew the risks. Taking down the dreadnought wouldn't be easy, but it was the only way they could win. They rushed forward, using their speed and agility to avoid the dreadnought's fire. They planted explosives along its key weak points, each one carefully timed to detonate at the right moment as they closed in on the dreadnought. The battle became even more intense. The alien soldiers, now under the command of Xyler, fought with a desperation that mirrored the humans' own. The energy from their weapons clashed in the air, filling the battlefield with the sounds of destruction. Blaze's heart pounded as he sprinted toward the massive ship. He was determined. This was humanity's last stand, and he wasn't going to let Earth fall without a fight. Just as the dreadnought's main cannon powered up, ready to fire its devastating shot, Blaze's squad set off the explosives. The shockwave from the explosion sent a massive tremor through the battlefield. The dreadnought's weapons faltered, its systems momentarily disabled. It was their chance. Blaze and his squad stormed the dreadnought, fighting their way through. The remaining alien soldiers. Their movements were swift, coordinated, and relentless. With one final push, they reached the core of the dreadnought systems and planted the final explosive. The countdown began. Blaze stood at the center of the chaos, watching the destruction unfold around him. The alien dreadnought, once an unstoppable force, was now a smoldering ruin. Its weapons were silenced, and its defenses crumbled. The humans had done the impossible. They had turned the tide. But Xyler wasn't done yet. He watched as his last weapon failed, his empire unraveling before his eyes. With a growl of frustration, he ordered his remaining forces to retreat, knowing that the battle was lost. The humans had won, but not without a price. As Blaze watched the alien forces retreat, he felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. War was over. Earth had been saved, but at what cost? His squad was battered, their comrades lost in the battle. But they had survived, and humanity had proven its strength. Blaze stood tall, knowing that the victory was theirs. Earth was safe. For now, victory at all costs. The battlefield was eerily quiet as the alien ships began to retreat into the sky, their engines roaring to life as they retreated from the planet they had tried so hard to conquer. General Xyler, watching from his command ship, clenched his fists in disbelief. His fleet was shattered, his soldiers in disarray, and the dreadnought that had been his final weapon was reduced to rubble. He had underestimated the humans, and now the price of that mistake was laid before him. Earth had survived. Humanity had won. Blaze Hunter stood on the front lines, his eyes scanning the horizon where the last remnants of the alien fleet disappeared into the atmosphere. The battle had been long, brutal, and costly, but it was over. Earth had been saved, but at what cost? The ground was littered with the fallen human and alien alike. Some of his best soldiers were gone, their sacrifices etched into the soil of this war-torn world. Blaze felt the weight of those losses, but there was something else in the air, now something that couldn't be ignored. The humans had proven something to the galaxy that day. They had shown the universe that Earth was not just a speck in the vastness of space. They were a force to be reckoned with. As Blaze walked among the survivors, he couldn't help but notice the faces of his soldiers. They were battered, their clothes torn, their bodies worn with exhaustion, but their eyes, they burned with pride. The human spirit had been tested in ways that no one could have imagined, and yet they had come through. Earth was theirs, and no one, not even the most advanced empire in the galaxy, could take that from them. "Captain," Lieutenant Reyes called. Stepping up beside him, "We did it. We actually did it." Blaze nodded, his gaze never leaving the horizon. Yeah, we did, but it wasn't just us. It was every soldier, every civilian who refused to back down. We fought as one. And that's what saved us. Reyes looked around at the ruins of the battlefield, the fallen bodies of both their enemies. And their comrades. Do you think they'll come back? She asked softly. The aliens, I mean. Blaze paused, taking a deep breath. They might. But they'll know better than to underestimate us again. This war was just the beginning. We've shown them what we're capable of. And if they think they can just come back and take Earth again, they're wrong. The sun began to set over the battlefield, casting long shadows across the land. Blaze looked out over the scene, feeling the weight of the past few days heavy on his chest. But there was something else, something that burned in his heart. Hope. For the first time since the invasion began, Earth had won. And as long as humanity stood united, they would always find a way to survive. Xyler, meanwhile, was facing the consequences of his failure. His fleet had been decimated, his soldiers scattered, and his plans shattered beyond repair. He had underestimated humanity in ways that no strategist in his empire's history had ever done before. And now he was forced to retreat, his pride and his forces in ruins. General, we've lost, Zarek said quietly, standing by Xyler's side. There's nothing left to do but leave. The humans have proven themselves. We are defeated. Xyler's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. No, he spat, his voice cold. This isn't over. It can't be. The humans may have won today, but we will be back. This planet isn't finished with us yet. Zarek said nothing, but the silence spoke volumes. There was no denying that the humans had won. Earth had proven itself as a worthy adversary. Xyler's pride and arrogance had led to his downfall, and now, all that remained was the bitter taste of defeat. Back on Earth, Blaze and his squad began the long journey back to their base. The sounds of the battle faded behind them, but the memories of those who had fought and fallen would never be forgotten. The human soldiers had made their stand, and they had won. The planet was safe for now. As Blaze walked, he couldn't help but think of the future. There was still so much to rebuild. The damage was immense, and countless lives had been lost, but Earth had survived. And with that survival came a newfound strength. Humanity had learned its true potential. And, as long as they remembered the sacrifices made during this war, they would always be ready to defend their home. Are we done? Reyes asked quietly, her voice tinged with both relief and sadness. Is the war really over? Blaze didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took in the view around him, the skies now clear, the battlefield still and silent. The humans had won, but the cost had been high. The world had been changed forever, and the scars of this battle would remain for generations. But as long as humanity held on to its hope and its resolve, it would rise again, stronger than before. We've won, Blaze said finally, his voice steady. But the fight never truly ends. We'll rebuild, we'll honor the fallen, and we'll be ready for whatever comes next. Because we are humanity. And no matter what the universe throws at us, we'll always stand. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light over the battlefield, and for the first time since the invasion began, Blaze allowed himself to feel the weight of victory. The humans had proved they were not just survivors. They were a force that could never be underestimated again.